Today, we are ranking every single team that has ever competed in LCS for the past 11 years and 22 splits. Before we get started, look down below at all of those logos. How many did you just completely forget about? Before starting this list, I tried remembering every single team that has competed, and I forgot about 2. Comment down below how many teams you remembered, and which teams do you wish were still competing to this day? Without further ado, let's get right to the list. Alright, starting off with number 1, we have Complexity. They competed in 2013 Spring. Last place, 9 wins. That's a lot of wins for a last place team. Only 2 games out of a playoff spot. They got sent down to relegation. Had to play Quantic, the original Cloud9. Did they win any games? No. Did they get any kills? About 5. They got absolutely destroyed. Marn definitely got the better draw. They're the other team that didn't make playoffs. But I believe 9 wins might just be the most wins from a last place team of any major region ever. Who knows? It's a long list. I'm just going to give them B tier. They did put up in a really good fight for getting last place. I was a huge fan of that first spring split. They did have Trolley. That was probably their most notable player. Next, we have Good Game University. They only competed for 1 split, but they have an amazing name, amazing logo, and they're actually the first team to make finals with 5 rookies. People thought it was Cloud9. It was actually Good Game University. Going into that first split, there was 4 established teams and 4 rookie teams. Good Game University was one of the rookie teams. Then you had the 4 established teams in CLG, TSM, Curse, and Dignitas. Everyone is expecting a finals or even Final Four with those 4 teams, but Good Game University actually came in and kind of just swept the floor with everyone, almost beating TSM in the finals. They lost 3-2 in that finals. Did rebrand. Coast is a whole different story, but Good Game University, as they stand, A tier. Next, we have Marn, who's going to go into C tier. Their logo is a bit of a disaster on this format, but you know what? Times were different back then. There was issues. They only completed 1 split. They did have players such as Nian Tonso. He bounced around on a bunch of different teams, but really no notable players outside of that. They went down, lost to Velocity 2-3 in the relegation tournament, which is kind of rough because they were 1 game out of a playoff spot. And then they lose to Velocity, who did even worse. So speaking of Velocity, we're going to put them behind in C tier. This was the original terrible team. Nowadays, you'll have people be like, oh, this team's horrible, this team's terrible, this team's this team's that. No. Velocity was originally that team, but then people realized teams could be actually a lot worse. They only got 5 wins in their first split, 3 of which came across by top 4 teams, so they just couldn't beat the lower teams, which is really weird. It's like the original Counter Logic gaming. Next, we have Curse. Curse was a weird one because they had a lot of fan favorites. They have players such as Voyboy, St. Vicious, Cops, Elements. They were eventually bought out by Team Liquid. I believe their best finish was 4th place, which, you know, 4th place meme. They just couldn't get over that hump. They had a lot of likable players. The org was decent. They did eventually get bought out. I don't know if the Curse websites are still going. Haven't been on them a whole lot lately. I want to put them right behind Good Game University. I don't think they just had the impact of that first split that Good Game University has. They definitely became the dark horse of the top of the main 4 teams. They kind of fell off, hence why TL bought them out and took their spot. Next, we have Winter Fox. This is going to be our first disgraceful team. For those that don't know, this team was the original EG. So EG came in, Winter Fox took their spot. This is actually Pobelter's original team, along with OpTic. A lot of, you'd think, you know, decent players, fun players, fan favorite players. The problem is they had a nepotism issue with Avalon. There's top laner who was either friends with the coach or friends with the owner, something like that. This guy struggled to even be in Diamond. Yet he got a starting spot, and they did absolutely terrible. And they got relegated right after, or they rebranded, something like that. But they're just a terrible team, in and out. Next, we have TK, Team Dragon Knights. So this was a team that got basically carried into the LCS by Alex Each, originally of Gambit Gaming. Gambit, yeah, in general. This team had a lot of issues. They had a lot of people playing for their team, mainly because they had insane visa issues. Like, I don't think they got their main roster until the last 3 weeks. So they went 3-15 or something. They got absolutely relegated for sure because they had no synergy. Their team never showed up. Their logo looks incredible. That's about the only thing. This also was Smoothie's original team. But despite all that, I still, you know what, they're better than Winter Fox because they have a good logo, but this is just a prime example of mismanaging a team. You think, oh, I got an LCS, I'm going to bring all these overseas players. You got to figure your stuff out before you do any of this. Next, we have Enemy. Enemy only played in one split, decent logo, but they're not disgraceful for one reason. They qualified, and they were actually offered over $1 million for their spot, and that was unheard of at times like this, especially for a rookie team. No, that never happened. But the management was like, you know what, we're going to roll with this team. We feel good about this team. We're going to go with it. They went 4-14 and immediately got relegated. It was rough. You know what, but I got to give them props for sticking to their guns and trusting their team. Even if it didn't work out, you got to give them some sort of props. Next, we have Renegades. Renegades was the Monte Cristo's team. This was also a team that had a lot of players. A lot of players. You know, you had players such as RF Legendary, Seraph, Crumbs, Alex H, Ninja, Freeze, Haku. So many players. They kind of showed up. They had one decent win where they had a back door, and then they just left. I don't know if they got relegated. Something happened. They did get, actually, yeah, they did rebrand into Envious, which is our next team. But yeah, no, they joined for one split. Probably the best logo. One of the best logos in the entire history of the LCS. But this team was a complete mess. They're not, I'm going to put them below Enemy, simply because Enemy was a bunch of rookies, and they had a hope and a dream there. They were trying to follow in Cloud9's footsteps. Just didn't work out that way. Next we have Envious, so which Renegades rebranded into Envy. They actually did pretty decent. They got 6th place in one of the splits. They went, I think, 2016 summer. They made playoffs, got smashed by Cloud9 3-1, and that was the infamous game where Jensen got like 22 kills, something like that. They did have a negative win rate going into the playoffs, which that was actually a funny thing that started to happen as LCS went on, because the top teams were just so dominant that it was hard for the 6th place teams to actually have winning records. So for Envious, they did join. I think this was Niski's team. For those of you who don't know, Niski was actually in the LCS in 2016. He was on Envious. So he did get bodied by Jensen, which, you know, is a precursor to all the things that happened in 2019. Envious, I'm probably going to put right below Complexity here. Probably the most average, one of the most average teams in the entire history of the LCS. Didn't really leave a huge mark. They had that one Jensen game, which it wasn't even a highlight for them. Team Coast. Okay, I'm just going to pop them right here. So the reason why Team Coast is down and disgraceful, they halted the advancement of amateur teams for years. This was like the Simpsons meme of Buddy throwing guy out of the bar in The Simpsons, and he just keeps coming back. This team just wouldn't go away. Got bottom 2 multiple years and always won relegation every single time. Eventually they left, but oh my god, was this team a stain on the LCS. There was so many players and so many teams we could have seen, but no, we got stuck with Coast year after year just to watch them fall apart over and over again. However, I will say I was tempted to put 2 Coast logos, because the 2013 Summer Coast was basically the Good Game University. They were solid. They barely missed playoffs. But the rest of it was just terrible, so they have to go down to disgraceful. Next, we have Gravity. This was a team, they probably had the best uniforms. They just wore leather jackets. This was Haunser's original team. We had Saint, Cop, Bunny Fufu, and actually, Last Shadow, LS, was the coach for this team for both the spring split, the entire spring split, and 1 week of the summer split. So he was actually in person doing the drafting and everything. They made playoff both of their splits, actually. They were actually first place for about in the midway mark of the split, I believe, in spring. But yeah, they just completely lost it in playoffs, lost 3-1 both their series, and then left the LCS. I will say, for an amateur team around that 2016 mark, they were one of the very few amateur teams that actually do really well. So I'm actually going to put them up in A tier, right behind Curse, actually. Logo has a lot to be desired. I know a lot of people liked it at first. I've never been a fan. I think it's a little too cheesy and a little too... it's like they handed the crayons to a couple kindergartners, and that's the logo that they came up with. Next, we have Vulcan /XDG. They played it in the entirety of 2013 and then got relegated at the end of 2014. So they made both playoffs in both their splits in both spring and summer of 2013. Actually made Worlds in 2013. They went to Worlds. I believe they only won 2 games. 3 games. Yeah, they won 2 or 3 games, but one of them was against Fnatic, who went 7-1 in groups. So the only loss that Fnatic had in groups in 2013 Worlds was against Vulcan. However, when they came back in summer, they were terrible. So for those that don't know, they joined. Zuna was their AD carry. Zuna was really bad. They kept swapping it around. They have Xmithy playing in the bot lane. Yes, this is Xmithy's original team. He eventually, once this team got relegated, Xmithy got picked up right away, and he started competing on a bunch of other rosters, such I believe CLG was his first team after this one. But yeah, Vulcan started high and just fell off a cliff. It was insane. They went from Worlds to just relegated. They only got like 4 wins in the summer split. I don't know what happened, but you know what? They beat Europe, so you got to give them a B, at least a B. That's about it. That's about the best I can do. So next we have Team Impulse Tip. So this was the team. It has Zhao Weizhao, Rush, Impact. This was Impact's first team, I believe, coming to North America after leaving SKT. So they got rebranded from LMQ, who we'll talk about later, and they actually made playoffs in both the splits they played. They got 4th, weren't able to win that 3rd place match or make the finals. They had 2 chances to get a better stand, just couldn't quite get it. They actually faced legal action because they weren't paying their players. And there was a bunch of other things going on, so they had to sell. They rebranded as a different team that we'll talk about later. And yeah, they kind of joined. They did bring a lot of fan favorites, though. You got to give them that. They brought Impact, they brought Rush. So you know what? I'm going to give them right below Vulcan. Yes, they had their legal issues. Didn't affect my viewing experience, and they brought a lot of cool players into the LCS. Next, we have Apex. Apex, I will say, probably one of the best logos in the entire history of the LCS. Yes, it looks like a car logo, but it is clean. It looks fantastic. Unfortunately, they only played in 1 split of 2016 summer. They actually failed relegations, like the promotion matches, a couple times prior to their first split. But unfortunately, they were only able to play 1 split. They got 7th, barely. I think they tied, and they lost the tiebreaker to get into playoffs. And then they actually got bought out by Dignitas. So for those that don't know, Dignitas actually got relegated. So they were gone. Out of the LCS, gone. But then Apex, they got downgraded, and then Dignitas just bought them, and then won the promotion and came right back up. So, you know what? Only 1 split. I honestly can't give them much. Like, I'll give them top of C tier because their logo is fantastic, and they actually did field a pretty decent roster. I was really hoping they'd stick around. Next, we have Team 8. This is probably the most average team in the entire LCS. One of the most forgettable, one of the most average. They placed 7th, they placed 8th, never made playoffs. They won promotion going into 2016. So they played both splits of 2015, didn't make playoffs in either one, won their promotion to go back into the spring split for 2016, but then they were bought out by Immortals, who reworked the entire roster. So basically they bought Team 8, kicked all the players, kicked all the management, everything, brought in Immortals, and as you know, Immortals came in and just kind of dominated a regular season for an entire year. However, I literally can't put them any higher. Team 8, pretty low. Didn't really have an impact. Probably their most impactful match in the entire history of the LCS was a tiebreaker which stopped Cloud9 from going down to relegations in 2015 summer. Next, we have OpTic. So OpTic was a big org coming in. People were expecting, like, you know what, they're such a big org, they're gonna rival TSM in fan base. They didn't even come close. They were one of the most unpopular teams. Big org, no real fan base when it came specifically to LCS. They played in 4 splits. They missed playoffs in their first 3. They originally had like elimination, but then in 2019 summer they actually made playoffs. They did lose 3-0, but they actually had a really cool roster. They had players such as Meteos, Dopla, Crown. They actually had a really solid roster. And then they also had Power of Evil at one point. They always put together really cool rosters that I liked. The problem was they could never string it into actual wins, which is a little depressing. I'm going to put them probably at the very back of, yeah, right here. Just completely average. You know what? They did stick around longer. Okay, we'll give them that. Right behind Tip. Okay, that's about as far as I'll go with that one. Okay, going into LMQ. I might get hate for this. I don't care. LMQ is probably my least favorite LCS team ever. So basically what happened was, in 2014, there was no such thing as... you could have anyone from any region on your team. It did not matter. So basically, LMQ was an 8th place Chinese LPL team. And they decided, hey, if we just go to NA, we get an easy trip to Worlds. Oh yeah, so what? They came to NA, so there was a full Chinese roster, not a single North American, nobody with a visa, nothing. And they came in, they got second in the regular season, losing out to Cloud9 in the standings, went to playoffs, thankfully, by the grace of God, lost to TSM in probably one of the greatest Game 5s. If you guys haven't seen it, big shout out, go watch TSM versus LMQ Game 5. I would argue probably the best game of LCS ever. In the history, 11 years, 22 splits of LCS, LMQ versus TSM Game 5 is the best game, and I'm not even a TSM fan. That game was hype, and it still gives me goosebumps to this day. Why do I put them in disgraceful? Because we sent a full Chinese team as a North American representative to Worlds. But the silver lining of that was they didn't get out of groups, but both our North American teams did. And this is the team, and this is the reason why there is now import rules. Strictly because of LMQ, because a lot of other people tried. They actually rebranded into TIP. There was a lot of issues with their roster. Google Vasily. See what happened with Vasily. Zhao Zhao was kicked from the league for boosting. There was just so many issues with this roster. You know what? I'm just glad it produced that Game 5. That's the only redeeming quality that LMQ has. Going into Clutch Gaming. Clutch Gaming, just because they ended the TSM dynasty, that was one of the coolest moments. Even if you're a TSM fan looking back, that was history in the making. That was such a fun roster. And they actually did make Worlds eventually, just not with the roster that eliminated TSM. I just think this was one of the few rosters in years, in a time, this was 2018. This was a time where teams simply did not join the league and beat the top players. TSM at this point had made, I think it was 10 straight finals. Even though their roster looked weak, even though they probably had the worst jungler one of the worst junglers in the entire league in Mike Young, everyone was expecting them to beat Clutch. Nobody even gave them a game. I think Jat said maybe they win a game. And then they beat TSM 3-1. Such an amazing piece of history. And then they come back, they go to Worlds. Yes, they went 0-6, but go look at that that group. That group was a disaster. There's no shot they were winning that, and nobody even blames them. People meme on TSM for going 0-6. Nobody memes on Clutch for going 0-6 because it's completely understandable. Next, we have Counter Logic Gaming. So this is a big one. This is a big one. This is probably the hardest one to place. I was looking through these teams, and this is the hardest one. Why is it hard? A lot of people think, it's CLG, you have to put them in S tier. But people don't remember, everything after 2016 was just rough. It was like 2.5 to 3 years of them making playoffs like once. They were terrible. They just made terrible roster decisions. They fell apart all the time, but they had such high highs. CLG was the biggest roller coaster in LCS. I will put them very, very, very top of A tier. I can't put them in S tier. I can't justify it. They had too many down years. As soon as Hotshot GG left, it felt like the soul of the team just died. And then they randomly leave the league. They sell everything, and we never hear from them again. So, history, yes. They brought a lot. They were the first North American team to make MSI Finals. First North American team to beat SK Telecom. But they just had too many down years. Too many. Echo Fox. So this is the team everyone wishes stayed in the LCS. I'm putting them in A tier. This team, if they didn't go through all their legal troubles, I have no doubt would still be in the league to this day. And I stand by that. I do not think this team would have left. There was only legal issues at the very top, and that is why Echo Fox is no longer here. Unfortunate. They were a fan favorite team. I know my brother, he swapped his team from one team to Echo Fox, and he was devastated when Echo Fox left the scene. Now, unfortunately for Echo Fox, they were terrible for years. Like, they had like 4 splits in a row where they only got 4 wins. Like, they were terrible. A team of passion, yes, but terrible. But in 2018, they actually did decently. I think they got 3rd, I believe. Yeah, they got 3rd in that split. So huge props to them. Wish they were back in the league. Golden Guardians. Golden Guardians. So this was a meme team. I can't. I get it. They had a really good year. I'll put them at the very bottom of BT. I'll put them right here. It's just they had too many bad years. Too many. Okay, now I'm thinking. Okay, there we go. They actually had a decent 2020. I will remember that. But for the first like 4 years, they were terrible. I think they only made playoffs once. They made 10th place like 2 or 3 times in a row. They were terrible. And I am actually so sad they left the league because they were finally starting to find their footing. Unfortunately, it came a little too late. They weren't able to repeat what they did in the spring going into summer. Yes, they made Worlds. They made a qualifying match, lost that 3-0, and then they just left the league. Haven't heard from them since. Next, we have Phoenix 1. So this was actually the timeline we have here. Is we had LMQ, which became TIP, which then became Phoenix 1. Phoenix 1 has one match that stands out, and that is them beating TSM, ruining their perfect season in 2016 summer. 2016 summer was a best-of-3 format. TSM was completely undefeated. I think they're like 15-0 or something. And Phoenix 1 beat them, and Phoenix 1 was the the 8th place team. And that was the only reason we have yet to have an undefeated team in the LCS, is specifically because of Phoenix 1. They won their promotions or whatever, but that was back when right before franchising started, so they didn't actually get to keep their spot because they didn't pass franchising. We had that sad moment with X Special. They got 3rd place in 2017 spring, so they have had a decent result. They just didn't have the branding behind them, and I think that's what hurt them. I'm going to put them right behind Golden Guardians. Actually, no, I think I'll move Golden Guardians up just a little bit. Okay, now we have the big dogs. These are the orgs that have been around the longest. They have the biggest fan bases, most of them, and they have the most history. I'm going to start with TSM. TSM was in the league for 11 years, 22 splits. They made finals, I think 12 times they made finals, won a bunch of splits. They were the original team, started back in Season 1, the biggest fan base in LCS history. There's no denying that. The TSM fan base is insanely massive. Without TSM, there's arguably no LCS. S+ tier. I'm not even a TSM fan, I can't deny it. If this team didn't exist, LCS wouldn't exist, and I think anyone reasonable would agree. You cannot put TSM any lower than S+ tier. They are the face of the LCS. Not anymore, but back then, despite what they did internationally, you cannot deny the impact they had on the LCS. Now moving on to Energy. So Energy actually competed in 2016, but they actually got relegated. So that was the team where they had Santorin. They had a very pink logo. I went back to that for a little bit, mainly because the NRG logo is black. It doesn't fit very well on this one. They got relegated. They're kind of a forgotten team. And then they actually got bought out by CLG. You know, as I said, CLG was gone. NRG came in, kept the same roster, basically, only replaced 2 people, and won a split, made quarterfinals. Why is NRG S tier? Well, they give me the vibes of the original Cloud9. You know, I've said this in my previous video, but they seem like 5 people that are genuinely friends. They play their own style, and they just came in and kind of just dumpstered on all the teams that everyone assumed that would beat them. I'm really excited for them going into the split. It's a small sample size, but if they keep going on this trajectory that they're going on now, they could potentially take TSM's spot, not in the history, but in the main rivalry that we had. Because you always need a rivalry in these kind of leagues. We had TSM versus Cloud9. Now potentially we get NRG versus Cloud9. I'm really hoping, because you always need a rivalry. Immortals, I'll put it right here. So Immortals, yes, top FC. So Immortals top FC. Why are they so low? The only reason they're not indisgraceful is because they have been loyal to the league. They have been very, very loyal to the LCS. They had really good splits to start off. You know, in their first 2 splits, they dominated. They went 17-1 in their spring split in 2016, lost to TSM in the semifinals. Then they dominated again. Again, they dominated in summer. Lost to Cloud9 in the semifinals. Had a really bad 17 spring. Made the finals, lost 3-1 in the most useless finals ever, but finals nonetheless. And then ever since that finals, this has been the most useless, lifeless, bodiless org I have ever seen in esports. Yes, they're loyal, but I was very, very surprised that they did not leave the league. I was fully expecting them to leave the LCS. They're still here. They always seem like their goal is how many wins can we get with the least amount of money spent? And it shows in the rosters that they've built over the years. They're going to have to do a lot this year to change my perception on them. Next, we have 100 Thieves. I'm putting them above CLG. I can't quite put them in S tier, but I'm going to put them in A tier. I think their branding is one of the best in the entire league, especially for 2018 spring, when we had a lot of new teams coming in. It was the exact same as 2013 spring. You had half the league as fully established brands. Then you had the other half new teams. We had a lot of new teams, and nobody hit the ground running in branding and performance like 100 Thieves. They made the finals in their very first split. They brought on fan favorites like Meteos. They had Afromu. They had a lot of good players that were fan favorites. Their clothing line blew up. They had a lot of things going right for them. But then they became very predictable. They became a watered-down team solo mid, where TSM, their whole thing with NA was they would master one or two really good strategies. They'd master it. They'd win NA. They'd go to Worlds. Either the meta would change or people would figure them out, and they'd get blasted. With 100 Thieves, there's a reason in 2021 they lost the spring split and the summer split 0-3. They went 0-6 in finals that year. Why is that? Because they became the most predictable team ever. Even at Worlds, they never changed their style, and they went 1-5. They didn't change anything, so I feel like they've stagnated. They've said they've wanted to leave the league, so I cannot put them in S tier. I can't put any team that wants to leave in the higher tiers except for TSM just because of the legacy. Next, we have Dignitas. I don't know, man. This is a hard one to place. I think I'm going to put them right here. Dignitas, a lot like Immortals, shows that they're loyal to the LCS. They want to be in the LCS. They're the only team from 2013. Yes, they haven't lasted the whole time, but they are the only org from 2013 spring to still be in the LCS. And they bought their way back in. They want to be here. And lately, they've been showing that they actually want to put together decent rosters. You know, last split when they put together Jensen and Santorin, they're bringing in established players. They want to compete. They are the only original org to never place top 3. Think of the big orgs. FlyQuest has done it. Golden Guardians has done it. Cloud9, TSM, NRG, 100 Thieves, all the orgs have done it. Dignitas is the only big name org in the entire history of the LCS to never make top 3. I'm hoping and praying that they do it so we can get some more parity in the LCS. I don't know if it'll happen. I don't think it happens this split, but I'm hoping it does. FlyQuest. This one's rough because, yes, I'm using the old logo. I love their old logo. I'm going to put them right here. They're very similar to 100 Thieves in that their branding took a bit. It took a bit. But the thing they had going for them was they had the most fan favorite roster in 2017 spring. When they joined the LCS, they had 3 parts of the original Cloud9. They had Balls, they had High, and they had Lemon Nation. And then they had Moon, and they had Altec. They had a very fan favorite roster. They reverse swept Counter Logic Gaming in the playoffs to make it to Vancouver to play in the 3rd place match. They lost 3-2. Cloud9 also lost 3-2. I went to that final, so I got to watch both my favorite teams lose back-to-back 3-2 finals. Very unfortunate, but ever since then, they stagnated for a little bit, but then they kind of popped off around that 2019-2020 mark. They made 2 back-to-back finals. Lost one 3-2, lost the other one 3-0 versus TSM and Cloud9 respectively. And ever since then, they've slowly been getting built up as a fan favorite with all the stuff they do with the environment, all their promotional material. They've just been popping off, and right now they're probably my 3rd favorite team, right behind Cloud9 and NRG. They've gone in and out. I have a lot of their jerseys. I've been a huge fan the entire time, and I think their branding, not as good as 100 Thieves. That's why they're behind 100 Thieves, but it did take them a little bit. Next, we have Team Liquid. So I'm going to spoil this. There's one team in S, more team in S+. I'm pretty sure you can guess it. I was thinking about it being Team Liquid, but it can't. They will go ahead of NRG. They are the 3rd best org in the entire history of the LCS. They've won 4 splits in a row. They've been there for a long time. They have a great owner in Steve, and they have shown a passion for not only winning LCS and performing in LCS, but also bringing that internationally and performing there. You know, they've made MSI finals. They won their 4 splits in a row. They've done a lot of good. But the problem is why they can't be S+, is because they had a lot of bad years. When they first joined the league, everything up until 2017 was bad. It was bad. They were putting Piglet mid lane. Times are tough when you're putting Piglet mid lane. But then I don't know what happened in 2018. Steve was like, all right, fine, I want to win. And he just decided to win. Team Liquid, even in my power rankings video, go watch that, by the way, going into the split. The reason I put TL as high as I did, if you took that exact same TL roster and put it on a different org, I'd probably have them 2 spots lower. But I have faith in Team Liquid. It's just because of the org. They are professional, they are passionate about esports, and they are such a powerful addition to the LCS. And being here is so good for the LCS to have a team like Team Liquid. Next, Cloud9. Cloud9 is now officially the longest lasting org in the history of the LCS. Now that TSM is gone, Cloud9 has played in 21 splits. They've won a bunch. They've probably made, I believe they've made the most finals now. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure with TSM falling off a little bit, I believe they have made the most finals now. They have the most second places, that's for sure. Now, does Cloud9 beat out Team Solo mid? Because, spoiler alert, Cloud9 is an S+. Absolutely they are. But do they beat out TSM? I don't care if y'all call me a fanboy. They absolutely do. Mainly because Cloud9 has stayed. If TSM was still in the league and still doing good, it would be the other way around. But Cloud9 has stayed in the league. They have performed internationally. They've performed domestically. They've won IEMs. They've done so much for the league. But I think right with TSM, they're right beside each other. I do not think, and you can call me crazy for this, I simply do not believe that LCS would still be running if it weren't for Cloud9 and TSM. I think if you take those two teams out of the LCS, LCS stopped years ago. So you can't have one without the other. It's the yin to the yang. This is one of the best rivalries. And I believe it's in NA, it's absolutely the most common finals. We had all of half of 2013. 2014 was both splits were TSM versus Cloud9 in the finals. Then the first split, we had 4 splits in a row that ended with Cloud9 versus TSM. And then we had more going into 2016 summer, then 2017 spring. We had a lot of finals between Cloud9 and TSM. Some of the most iconic moments are between these two teams, and you can't put them any lower. Normally in these lists, I don't like having more than one team in S+ or anything. No matter what it is, I always like one. But you simply cannot have one without the other in this case. All right, so that's my ranking. We didn't forget anyone important. We have all the great LCS teams here. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video, subscribe, and comment why I'm wrong down below with your own personal list.